Hello, my name is Alexander Fahie. I'm the CEO and founder of Ethical Angel. And like a lot of you, I'm stuck in self-isolation. And I'm thinking about a future world after coronavirus and perhaps what we could do now to ensure it's a better, fairer future for us all.
Coronavirus has brought misery to millions and disruption to billions. Economies around the world are facing recession, the likes of which we haven't seen in 90 years, and unemployment in the US and UK could surpass the levels reached during the Great Depression. It'll be a long time before we get back to normal. The question I have is, do we wish to return to normal? Or should we use this period to plan and work towards a better future? Another crisis in another time led to an extraordinary change. In 1942, amidst the death and misery, displaced people's commercial hiatus of World War II, something wonderful was seeded. William Beveridge published Social Insurance and Allied Service, transforming the ordinary people's lives at a time of great crisis by leading to the creation of the National Health Service and the expansion of national insurance. Today's pandemic is just as far-reaching as World War II. Social media beams information into our self-isolation silos, as the wireless did for a generation past, hunkered down in the Anderson shelters. Again, we see examples of how threats to our way of life appear to bring people together. As with the communities formed during the Blitz, so are new communities being formed today. We have seen neighbours before now unknown place notes on the doors offering to help with groceries, and a volunteer army of 750,000 rise up to support the most vulnerable. Entrepreneurs have made 3D printing plans for respirators open source, and businesses have diverted resources to help the common good. And generally, the public have accepted and adopted the restrictions enforced by the government for the safety of all. In other words, there are things to be thankful for, but to be corona-optimistic, we need to make the best of the opportunities for change that this crisis offers. We must be bold, brave, and innovative. And in this short video, I share 7 seeds that I believe, if sown today, could, as they did in 1942, benefit us all in the future. Seed 1. Climate change policy. Global warming is real. It is unequivocal. And according to NASA, 19 of the 20 warmest years all have occurred since 2001. But as we have seen in Wuhan and northern Italy, a sudden reduction in greenhouse gas emissions can have an immediate effect. As the world languishes in lockdown, we are witnessing the largest scale experiment of its kind. With planes grounded and industry on pause, emissions from travel and factories have subsided. The European Space Agency says nitrogen dioxide emissions in northern Italy have fallen by an average of 10% per week since mid-February. And in China, NASA reports that nitrogen oxide emissions produced by cars, factories and power plants are 10 to 30% lower than normal. We're seeing similar reductions in Korea, who have until now relied heavily upon coal-burning power stations for energy. And we will soon see data for the UK and the USA. While this has provided much-needed respite for our environment, emissions are likely to return and may even increase if governments introduce stimulus packages to ensure industrial output, travel, and the wider economy returns to pre-crisis levels, as they did following the 2008 recession. But the situation in which we find ourselves offers governments an unprecedented opportunity to incentivize industry in a different way, by, for instance, ensuring businesses adopt low-carbon business models in return for state aid. A universal transition to low-carbon business models reduce the emissions, like nitrogen dioxide, that trap heat within our atmosphere. And whilst this will not halt climate change, it will give us and the climate a time frame sufficient to allow ecosystems to adapt naturally, to ensure that food production is not threatened, and to enable economic development to proceed in a sustainable manner. For me, this has to happen. My second seed is the protection of our flora and fauna. It is widely believed that coronavirus is a zoonotic disease, originating in bats and was passed to humans in a wet market where live and dead animals are sold in Wuhan, China, through an infected intermediate species. Coronavirus, like SARS and Ebola, also zoonotic diseases before it, has shown us that our appetite for exotic flora and fauna is putting our health at risk. Wet markets, the destruction of nature's last habitats, concentrating our planet's remaining wild animals, and the trafficking of endangered species for human consumption is bringing what is left of them and us together. The UN's Environment Chief Inga Anderson warns that never before have so many opportunities existed for pathogens to pass from wild and domestic animals to people. Of the 1,415 infectious organisms known to be pathogenic to humans, 61% are zoonotic. What's more, 70% of emerging viruses stem from wild animals, which could pose as great, if not greater risk than this existing pandemic. Unlike Ebola and SARS, which were geographically contained, coronavirus has spread around the world and affected us all. Its impact on our lives, businesses, and public services has shown us that our global climate change policy is not only connected, but underpins our social and economic systems. With a hopefully more aware audience, it is time for us to take care of nature, to be bold and globally legislate and assertively enforce the protection of commonly trafficked animals, nature's last habitats, and in doing so, our climate. My third seed is about the future of work. In 2018, the Chartered Institute for Professional Development released Flexible Working, the Business Case, a report stating that at the time only 11% of UK jobs supported flexible working, even though 87% of applicants wanted the opportunity. The report even included arguments that flexible working resulted in higher productivity, retention, and engagement. And so why did flexible working not catch on? Why did companies like Yahoo and IBM famously roll back on deploying flexible working to their workforce? I believe without a shred of evidence, there was a combination of mistrust in employees to be productive when autonomous and a lack of digital infrastructure to support rollout. Coronavirus has changed all of that, as businesses have had no choice but to trust their people and learn to work with them in a virtual world. This pandemic has fundamentally restructured the way we work, and trust, as with the digital infrastructure to support flexible working, is now necessary for many businesses just to continue. The question is, will it return to pre-coronavirus normal? Employers and employees have an opportunity to lock in the positive aspects for a time when we are no longer obligated to work flexibly. In 2019, according to Mumsnet Jobs, 73% of parents said having children made it more difficult to progress in their careers, and 63% of women did not feel UK companies were family friendly. Flexible working, reducing the time cost of commuting to work or travelling for conferences or for business, and the economic cost necessitating childcare to just one parent, has the potential to make work and pay fairer for all. With the digital infrastructure now in place and autonomy the new albeit temporary norm, it's reasonable to hope that the seed for future fairer working has been planted, giving more employees a better work-life balance. Seed 4 is all about whom we value. On the evening of the 26th of March and following Thursdays, Brits emerged from their homes across the country to applaud the tireless efforts of NHS workers. Only months earlier, an NHS staff survey revealed 40% of staff had felt unwell because of work-related stress. 21% wanted to quit the NHS, and 78% experienced unrealistic time pressures, and fewer than a third felt their organisation took firm action to improve staff well-being. With successive pay stagnations and benefit cuts leading up to the crisis, for many of those who support our daily lives, nurses, doctors, other medical staff, as well as delivery drivers, shelf stackers, rubbish collectors, teachers and transport workers, it's unsurprising that many of those who we now designate essential workers felt undervalued. I believe that this period offers us a chance to revalue these roles, both eudaimonic, i.e. ensuring the essential workers have the better experience of work, less stress, a greater focus on well-being, and hedonic, immediate satisfaction like pay increases. And we're already seeing signs of that. The Union of Shop, Distributive and Allied Workers reported that Sainsbury's had given its staff a 10% bonus for working during this pandemic, and Tesco's and Aldi's have also confirmed they're doing the same. Now, both for incumbents and future generations of essential workers, actions can be done to revalue those who do what they can to look after the rest of us. My fifth seed is around consumerism. Arguably, we're the most gluttonous, materialistic, and wasteful generation in history, and we're encouraged to be so every day, as consumer spending underpins most developed economies. But coronavirus has given us a moment to pause and reflect on our consumption levels and materialism. Currently, supermarkets are not offering the range that we're used to, and supply chain limitations and self-isolation impedes our access to what were once readily available electrical, fashion, etc. goods. Perhaps a natural consequence of reduced supply and access is a more thoughtful, less wasteful society. A society that repairs before replacing and shops locally and responsibly for what it needs, reducing air miles and waste. If society leads, the proponents of consumerism will have to adapt, and a future economy, less reliant upon consumer spending, is definitely possible. New capitalism is seed number 6. Post-World War II, the approach to businesses grew from the displacement of Keynesian economics and a relaxation of capital controls that till the late 1940s caged international capitalists. Lobbying in Western nations led to financial liberalization, further swinging the financial control from the public to the private sector. And with that swing of interest came greater influence, where the focuses of businesses coupled with globalization and transnationalism affected more people than ever before. During this period, most corporations espoused shareholder theory, where prioritizing profit for shareholder gain was the primary function. Critics argue that this developed a capitalist culture of short-termism that propagated immorality, like Robert Maxwell's raid on the Mirror employees' pension schemes to hijinks auditors, and Enron's executives' exploitation of stakeholders. But for every Enron, there are 10,000 good companies, and employee activism, pressure from consumers, and pioneering leaders are already driving change in the role of business and the view of capitalism, away from shareholder to stakeholder theory. Promotion from organizations like the Meaningful Business 100 and legally binding business networks like B Corp are recognizing those leading transition to a more purposeful business that values stakeholders above all else. Capitalism is not perfect, but like democracy, it is the best system we have so far, and it is the greatest vehicle we know for social cooperation. I hope that coronavirus will lead to all businesses across the world adopting stakeholder theory, allowing them to move away from short-termism and quarterly reporting and use their influence and resources to support a new capitalist model that's underpinned by and rewards purpose as well as profit. The first test for businesses is the actions they take during this crisis. Did they look after their staff, suppliers, and customers? Did they do what they could support their communities? And did they listen to the interests of their stakeholders? And did they do all of this because it was right, even at the expense of their balance sheet? My last seed is around government. And it's perhaps the most radical, but I think has the greatest potential for ensuring a fairer future for all. A universal basic income or citizen's stipend has been discussed in the UK since the 16th century and much more so recently. Essentially, it's a regular, non-means tested, automatic social dividend. The recipient can spend it on whatever they want, and contrary to criticism of the policy, in over 100 contemporary trials, proceeds were rarely spent on frivolous pursuits, drugs, or alcohol. And I think this seed, if targeted now, is important for two main reasons. Firstly, livelihoods. Coronavirus is going to make it very obvious to businesses what parts of their workforce are less necessary and what roles can be automated. This pandemic has only furthered our progress to the artificial intelligence age, where many traditional jobs may become redundant. A basic income would help those most at risk of redundancy to upskill, learning necessary expertise for a plethora of new roles which are very likely to emerge in the new age. Second is representation. In the UK, only 5% of small and medium-sized enterprises are Black, Asian, and minority ethnic led, and BAME people are twice as likely to live in poverty compared to their white counterparts. A person's financial circumstances has a dramatic effect on their opportunity to pursue an idea into an enterprise. A social dividend would give disadvantaged groups greater opportunities to create new enterprises that in turn would increase representation of their communities, increase the potential for BAME wealth generation, and benefits us all. With the UK Chancellor Rishi Sunak on a war footing, borrowing 15% against GDP, which we haven't seen since the Second World War, this appears to be the perfect time to test the effectiveness and viability of universal basic income. He asked me if I understood the significance of the occasion and told me that it was a milestone in history. It was the most civilized step any country had ever taken. These are the words of Sylvia Diggory, the first patient of the NHS, when she recalled meeting the minister who launched it, Aneurin Bevan. During this pandemic, we too have the opportunity to propagate seeds that could lead to change. Nothing will make up for the many thousands of people who are affected and lose their lives to this virus. But we can still use Corona-optimism in this unprecedented time to change the course of society for the betterment of people and planet. We just need to sow the seeds today. Thank you.